Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. A father in Johnston County is charged with murdering 3 of his biological children and a stepchild after deputies say he called 911 and confessed to killing them. 38-year-old Wellington Dickens III appeared in court Tuesday for the first time and is due back in court this afternoon. WRAL Shaun Gallegher was in court on Tuesday and joins us with what we know so far about this investigation. Shaun, thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course.
So when did we first hear about all of this?
Yeah, it was just before noon on Tuesday when we learned that the Johnston County Sheriff's deputies were out at this scene in Zebulon. And really the first word that we heard from law enforcement was atrocious. I mean, you can't even imagine what they were explaining was out there. They say Dickens called 911 Monday night just after 10 o'clock, admitting to killing his kids. When they got to his house, Dickens told them that his 3-year-old son was alive inside, but inside his garage, he told investigators 4 of his children were in the trunk of a car. 3 of those kids are his biological children, ages 6, 9, and 10, and then 1 stepchild who was 18 years old.
It's just really gruesome details here, hard stuff to hear and to talk about. What was it like when you were in the courtroom on Tuesday and to see Dickens face to face?
Honestly, very uneventful and very fast. I don't know if it's still because the investigation is so fluid and they still have so much to kind of comb through about what they saw, what they're investigating, but he basically came in, requested a public defender, and then was ushered out. Of course, not given any sort of bond since this charge is so serious, but what was pretty interesting was when we were in there around 2 o'clock on Tuesday, they were only charging him with 1 murder, but shortly after he went through that hearing, 3 additional charges were filed, so he is facing 4 murder charges right now, but because of that, he'll be back in court on Wednesday to hear those charges against him again.
Right. And like you said, this is so fluid. I mean, this, investigators say they first learned about this late on Monday night, and then pretty much all day on Tuesday they were at that home until into the evening. So what do we know so far about who Dickens is, and what do we know about his family?
Yeah, we're still trying to unpack a lot about him right now, but what we've learned is that his great uncle tells us that Dickens is an Iraq War veteran, and said that he basically has had problems ever since he returned home. He didn't really elaborate specifics on that, just saying that he's different. But also we know that he married his wife in 2015, and then about a year and a half ago, his wife died of complications during a pregnancy. But also they faced accusations of against their parenting before, with a case that was filed from Wake Med about neglect for one of their children back in 2016, believing that they were not caring for a child that Wake Med said had jaundice, and that they believed that there were problems of neglect there. I will say that Dickens did file a lawsuit against Wake Med about that. Nothing ever came of that. But it's really inside the charging documents for this crime that make this tragedy a whole lot more gruesome when you really look into it.
Right. Okay. Let's take a quick break right there, and we'll be right back. So, Shaun, of course, we know the timeline of when investigators found out about this started on Monday night, but what do we know about the entire timeline here?
Yeah, this is where it gets a lot more troubling. When we finally saw the charging documents that were filed today, there's a good amount of information in those. They kind of keep it vague about, the details of the actual crime. You don't really see that when you're reading arresting or charging documents, but there was one line in there that was particularly concerning, that investigators believe these kids have been dead since May 1st. I mean, just think about that. That's almost 6 months that those kids were allegedly in the trunk of that vehicle through the summer while, he went about his everyday life.
Yeah, it's just very disturbing to think about. And do we have any, sense of, were there any questions asked about the whereabouts of these kids? Do we know anything about their schooling, anything like that?
Yeah, so that is a big question that I think we've all had. This number of kids that have been apparently missing since May. Who's accounting for them? But we checked with both the Johnston County and Wake County public school systems. Neither of them had any record of any of these kids being students there, which, that's clearly an area that could have been a safety net if they were, enlisted in one of these schools, that they would be asking questions about where these kids are for months on end. But, another question we have is, why haven't neighbors spoken up? I mean, it is, again, pretty gruesome, but, those kids in the car for 6 months over the summer in the heat, you would think somebody would raise some questions about that. But our own WRAL's Heidi Kirk was out at the scene in Zebulon talking to neighbors, and, they tell her that, Dickens really kept to himself. They never even saw him, cut his lawn, or really any kids live there, for the exception of when they moved in from, and that was back in 2023, according to court records, or I guess property records that we could see in the town of Zebulon.
What are we expecting to come out of this next court appearance? I know you said the one on Tuesday was pretty quick and pretty routine.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect more of the same. I called the district attorney in Johnston County after that quick appearance just to say, what can we expect? We know that there are more deaths in there, and at that point there was only the one murder charge. And he was quick to usher me off the phone that I think he wants to keep this tight to the vest as they make sure that they can, follow everything as they go through with this investigation. So I would anticipate it's probably going to be very similar, but you never know. They might shed some more details about what we could expect or what the investigators found during the entire investigative process all day Tuesday. But hopefully, Wednesday morning we will learn more when the Johnston County Sheriff holds a press conference as well.
Yeah, and what details are you really going to be listening out for at that press conference?
Yeah, I think, my biggest question is, have law enforcement been called out to that home before, right? Like, I requested all of the calls for service to that house during the time period that, Dickens lived there. And, with something this awful, I think everybody just wants to try to have an answer, right? Like, it seems unbelievable that somebody could be accused of doing things like this. So you want to know, was there some sort of intervention that could have happened, some sort of prevention that could have happened if law enforcement or, the Department of Health and Human Services or anybody stopped by that home at some point just to, try to figure out how this was even able to happen. But, there's also some of the more specific questions. What actually happened to those kids? How did they die? Is there anything else that Dickens said to investigators that could key them into motive about why those kids all died? And, I think ultimately, as tragic as this all is, I think a lot of people are thinking about Dickens' 3-year-old son who survived all of this. He is the lone survivor of this entire family. That 3-year-old's mom is dead. His dad is now, likely going to be in jail for the rest of his life if he is found guilty for these murders. And all of his siblings are gone as well. So what does his future hold? What's being done with him in the short term? And honestly, really, what are they doing long term?
Right. Yeah, it's a really tough case. Thank you so much, Shaun. We appreciate your reporting on it. And, as Shaun said, that press conference with the sheriff is expected for 10 a.m. on Wednesday. We will be following that closely on WRAL.com and all of our platforms. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. That's a daily email with Triangle news, events, headlines to help you get ready for the day. You can sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.